everybody. I'm still working on exam grading, so I will finish that up by the end of the week. And because of our compressed timeline, because of the extra week of spring break, and then the fact that the semester is going to end on the same day it would ordinarily have ended, there's another exam coming up in 2 weeks. Now, what I think I'll do is make it relatively short. We have covered less material since we've had less time, and I also think we've all been less functional during this time. So I will make it shorter. It will still be open book, open notes, of course, and I'll get a study sheet up on Blackboard for you tomorrow, Thursday, okay? Today's lecture notes material is a continuation of Monday's topic, which is stigma management. And in particular, we're looking at passing. Passing is only possible for those whose stigma is concealable. So not every stigmatized individual can pass, at least not in every situation. Today I'm talking in the lecture notes about some of the characteristics that influence the ability to pass. Those characteristics are visibility. These are Goffman's terms, by the way. Visibility, obtrusiveness, focus, the decoding capacity of the audience, and biographical information. So there's 5 important characteristics of stigma that influence the ability of a stigmatized individual to pass. So Goffman calls the first characteristic visibility, but I think it's better to think of it as perceptibility, because not everything that's perceptible, visibility isn't the only way for stigma to be perceptible. So you should think of it in terms of just how evident is the stigma to others upon an initial encounter. So, I mean, that does mean taking visibility into account, but it also may mean things like audibility. Some stigmas are audible. Some stigma are, I mean, think of all of our senses, really. Some stigmas are about smell. I mean, so I think that it's better to think of what Goffman calls visibility as perceptibility. Anyway, so how perceptible or how evident is a stigma to others upon initial encounter? Goffman's second important characteristic of a stigma that influences the ability to pass is what he calls obtrusiveness. That just means how much does the stigma interfere with the flow of everyday life. So, you know, a stigma could be highly visible, but not necessarily very obtrusive, or it could be vice versa. A stigma could be not visible at all, but highly obtrusive. The third characteristic that influences our ability to pass, Goffman calls focus. That just means, you know, where or when specifically is the stigma going to be relevant? Where is it going to matter? Because even the most visible stigma doesn't necessarily matter in every interactional situation. The fourth characteristic that influences our ability to pass doesn't really have anything to do with us. It has to do with the decoding ability of our audience. Does your audience have the skill or the experience with a particular stigma to even notice that it's present? In other words, is your audience in some way wise? And then the fifth characteristic that influences our ability to pass is the way our stigma may be present in our biographies. In other words, some stigmas are only present if others have information about our past. In other words, they're not visible or perceptible upon initial encounter at all. Some stigma become visible or perceptible in the presence of biographical others. In other words, are there people who are still part of your life, but who you knew when you were an addict or whatever stigmatized identity you may have once possessed? Um, so, biographical information or biographical people might give you away, and that's another characteristic that influences your ability to pass. In the lecture notes, I use what I think it's a really great example. A really great example of all these different aspects of stigma at work in a case of passing. And that's the case of our 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was paralyzed from the waist down as an adult. He got polio when he was in his 30s. But he managed to hide his disability from the American people through almost 4 full terms as president of the United States. That's right, there were no term limits back then. In fact, FDR is the reason why we have term limits now. So he was elected as president of the US 4 times and managed to keep his disability hidden from most of the American public for that whole time. Read the lecture notes because there's more detail in there. And then in the video transcript, I'm going to put a link to a video clip of disability activists advocating for the inclusion of FDR's wheelchair in the memorial that was built to honor him in Washington, D.C. In the 90s. So I'll put the video link in the video transcript. It's just a C-SPAN, it's a few minutes of C-SPAN where disability activists are being interviewed about why they want something that FDR spent his whole adult life hiding from the public to be visible to the public in his memorial. And they did succeed at that. And you can look up pictures of the FDR Memorial online as well. We'll talk more about stigma and more about the exam on Monday. I'll get a study guide up for you tomorrow. I'll keep working on the grading. Try to keep up with the reading and lecture notes. You should also be starting your final paper, and I know that feels like a lot right now, but you can do it. I have found that sometimes, not all the time, sometimes work helps me structure these weird pandemic days. Anyway, email me if you're having any questions or any difficulties. I'm super open to all kinds of possibilities right now, okay? Hang in there, Huskies.